Begin.
Welcome to the Water Policy and Legislation Committee and Special Meeting of the Board of Directors for West Basin Municipal Water District for December 13, 2023. It's now 1 o'clock. I'll call this meeting to order. Do we have a quorum, Mr. General Manager?
Madam Chair, I'll read through roll call. Director Don Deere. Here. Madam Chair Gloria Gray.
Here.
Director Scott Houston. Director Desi Alvarez. Director Harold Williams. Madam Chair, we do not have a quorum. However, we do have both members of the committee, the chair and the official member. And because we only have a couple of information items, we're ready to proceed.
Okay, thank you. All right, are there any public comments?
Madam Chair, we have not received any requests for public comment, though this meeting is being held both virtually and in person. If there are any members of the public that would like to make public comment, please indicate so now by raising your virtual hand. And Madam Chair, I do not see any requests for public comment.
Do we have any presentations?
No presentations.
Action calendar?
And Madam Chair, we do not have any items for action today.
Okay, information calendar, please.
Yes, Madam Chair. The first item that we have for you is item 6A. It is related to our 2023 Legislator of the Year Award. And for this presentation, we have Matt Bay, our Manager of Water Policy and Resources.
Thank you, EJ, and good afternoon, directors. I'm now on page 3 of the agenda packet. And as you know, West Basin has a history of recognizing the efforts and the successes of our state and federal representatives through our Legislator of the Year Award. This is something that we've done for, I think, about 15 or so years now. And if you take a look at page 5 and 6 of the agenda packet, you can see a list of all the previous legislators that West Basin has selected for the Legislator of the Year Award. And just as a reminder, last year, we essentially gave out awards for 2 years to kind of cover 2 years, those being for 2021 and 2022, since we had missed a year due to the COVID pandemic. So as a result, last year we gave out 9 awards, which is a pretty significant number. And so I think now that we're back to a more, somewhat of a more normal cycle, we can really kind of focus in on those legislators that have shown leadership on water issues this year. And as has been past practice, staff does have some recommendations for you to consider as part of your discussion. We believe that several elected officials have really stood out for their work over the past year that really benefited not only West Basin, but our communities and the water industry as a whole. And yes, in presenting these to you, we certainly don't have any expectations as to how many you would want to choose. I think that would be up to the board. But if it pleases the committee chair, I'm happy to go through some of those options with you here today for this year's awards. And otherwise, I'm happy to turn it over to the committee members for further discussion.
Thank you. Director Deere, would you like their
I'd like to hear.
recommendation?
I have none. I'd like to hear the staff's recommendations.
Okay, please, Matt, go on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I'd just like to note real quick that the general manager and I did have a conversation about some of these potential nominees, and we agreed that the following folks we think are pretty well deserving of your consideration. So I'll start on the state side, and we have 2 to present to you today. The first is Senator Ben Allen, who we think really continues to show great leadership on water issues. And the reasons for that are a few. Senator Allen, he's currently the author of one of the proposed climate bonds that will very likely move forward in 2024. And he and his staff have been very engaged with water agencies to understand the priorities for the climate bond. And West Basin staff has also been engaged with his office earlier this year about our needs in the water bond, what we would like to see in there, especially with regard to recycled water and some of the priorities that we have for our recycled water program. In addition, Senator Allen authored legislation this year, SB 676, and that legislation did pass. And that bill will help ensure that residents are able to install drought-tolerant landscapes with fewer obstacles from local governments. So we think that's a win for water agencies with grass replacement programs like ours, as well as the communities that we serve. And so for those reasons, amongst others, we believe that Senator Allen is a good candidate for this year's award. And then the second one on the state side that I wanted to mention that I think is deserving is somebody who's not in our service area, but she's had a long history of running legislation that's been beneficial to the water industry. And that's Senator Ana Caballero, who proposed 2 bills this year. Both of those bills were supported by West Basin's Board of Directors. Those bills were SB 23 and SB 366. SB 23, yes.
Matt, excuse me for interrupting, but Don, could you take over after take this call, if you will? I'll be right back. Directly.
Sure, I'll take over.
Thank you.
Yes. Matt, continue.
Okay, thank you. SB 23 would have helped expedite infrastructure projects through their environmental permitting processes, while SB 366 would establish water supply planning targets to help the state meet its future reliability goals, including recycled water. Again, both of these bills were supported by West Basin, but also by the California water industry at large as bills that would identify and streamline projects to expand water reliability throughout the state. And while neither bill passed this year, it really showed that Senator Caballero continues to be a leader on water issues in California. And so as such, we think, again, that she's deserving of consideration for an award.
Where is she from?
She currently represents kind of the central San Joaquin Valley, Salinas area. Yeah. And so those are the 2 state awards, and I can go ahead and go through with the federal awards as well, if you'd like, Director Deere. So we have 3 potential nominees for your consideration on the federal side. The first is Senator Alex Padilla, who has quickly come into his own on water issues in Congress, representing California water interests as well as ratepayers and disadvantaged communities. Based on his interest in water, he's recently been added to the Senate Committee on Energy and Natural Resources, which includes U.S. Bureau of Reclamation and Western water issues. And he also serves on the Environment and Public Works Committee in the Senate, where he chairs the subcommittee on fisheries, water, and wildlife, with oversight of the U.S. EPA and the Army Corps of Engineers. He's very involved in low-income water assistance issues, and it's expected that he'll introduce some low-income water ratepayer assistance legislation in the coming year. For those reasons, we believe that Senator Padilla is a good option for the award. I would note that we did select him for an award last year, but again, I think he definitely merits consideration for this year as well. Next, we have Congressman Adam Schiff, who represents a portion of the West Basin service area. Congressman Schiff has taken a much more focused interest on water issues over the past couple of years. This was very apparent to us and Director Houston when we met with his staff in Washington, D.C. earlier this year, and it became even more evident in the last month or 2 when 2 of the staff members requested a district update and tour at the Edward C. Little facility in November. Congressman Schiff is running for the open Senate seat left vacant by the passing of Senator Feinstein. His staff has made it very clear to us that he wants to continue to become much more familiar with water issues and priorities, and West Basin will continue to have a dialogue with them in the coming year, both when we go out to Washington, D.C., and they said, to kind of reach out to them anytime we have issues that we want to talk about with their office. So based on his interest in water and desire to work with West Basin and that of his staff, we recommend Congressman Schiff as a good option for one of the awards this year. And then last, but certainly not least, we are recommending Congresswoman Grace Napolitano as another option for this year's award. While she is exiting Congress next year, Representative Napolitano continues to be a leader for water issues in Congress. She's currently crafting legislation related to water supply and conservation, kind of with ties to the U.S. Army Corps that could benefit West Basin and our recycled water program should it move forward in Congress next year. And obviously, as you know, she's been a great friend and supporter of West Basin for many years, especially with recycled water issues. And so we think it's very fitting for her to receive a Legislator of the Year award before she retires from Congress. So with that said, I've presented 5 potential nominees for you to talk about and consider, 2 on the state side, 3 on the federal side. So staff now wanted to turn it over to the directors for any further discussion. And then just to let you know that any additional feedback that we received from you today will be reflected in the memo that we have for next week's board meeting. So thank you for letting us provide you with some options, and we're happy to answer any questions that you might have for staff.
My personal
Don, I'm
opinion is
back. Go
of
on, Don.
Gloria, and we're talking
Yeah, I
about the
did.
the recommendations.
Okay.
Did you hear all the recommendations? There were
I
5.
just heard Grace Napolitano, which I think is a great idea.
Okay, also Alice Padilla,
Yeah,
Ben Allen, Adam Schiff, and is it
Anna Caballero.
Anna Caballero?
Yeah.
yeah, I think
I-
I'm fine with that if you are, Don.
Yeah, I like all 5.
And Madam Chair, if I can just add one thing. One thing I wanted to note was that West Basin staff did contact both our state and federal lobbyists to discuss the potential nominees. And so these recommendations were prepared in consultation with both NPA as well as BSA.
Where do they go from here? Where do they go from here?
We would take a memo to the board. So next week, we would provide those list of nominees that you and Director Gray have presented, and then we'll have any further discussion there if anybody wants to take it out for discussion.
I would say present all 5 to the board. They can do what they want.
I agree, Don. I agree.
That's perfect. All right.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, that brings us to our next item, which is item 6B. It is our monthly state and federal legislative update for November 2023. And again, for this presentation, we have Matt Bay.
Thank you, EJ. So I'm now on page 7 of the agenda packet. And both of the state and the federal monthly reports have been sent to all of the board members. And I believe they'll also be posted to the meeting chat here for public accessibility. So I wanted to kick off the state report by talking about some of the leadership changes that have taken place in the California Assembly the past few weeks. More detailed information about this issue is included in the monthly NPA report. I also included an attachment to this item. That is a letter from the Assembly Speaker, Robert Rivas, about the changes in the Assembly committees and other leadership roles. And we've previously reported that Assemblyman Rivas assumed the speaker role this fall. And so he's now starting to put his personal touches on the Assembly leadership team. I won't go into all of the details of the changes, as you can read them in the related materials, but I will point out a couple of highlights. First, Assembly member Isaac Bryan was moved from the majority leader role to become chair of the Assembly Committee on Natural Resources. As a member of the West Basin delegation, it's a benefit for sure to West Basin and our other water agencies in the region to have Assembly member Bryan in that role, as many water issues come before that committee. Assemblymember Bryan was replaced as the majority leader by Assemblywoman Cecilia Aguiar Curry. Another committee that regularly considers water bills is the Assembly Water Parks and Wildlife Committee. Diane Papin from San Mateo will become the chair of this committee, replacing Rebecca Bauer-Cahan. That Assembly member Papin authored a couple of water bills this year that put her at odds with water districts. However, she also did not support some of the water rights bills that were opposed by the water industry. So there's a bit of a dichotomy there that should make her new role quite interesting. And I think there'll be some opportunities for the water industry to work with her in that new role. The Speaker Rivas also tapped Assembly member Jesse Gabriel to lead the Assembly Budget Committee going forward. Gabriel is not in our service area, but he represents an area that's immediately adjacent to West Basin Division 4 in North LA County. And he was one of the recipients of a Legislator of the Year award from us last year for his work on the tax exemption bill related to turf removal rebates. On the Senate side, a transition is also expected to occur early next year when in February, outgoing Senate President Pro Tem Tony Atkins will hand over the president's gavel to Senator Mike McGuire, who is from Santa Rosa. We'd expect to see the Senate committee and other leadership changes to occur at that time, if not before, since we'll be in the second year of a legislative session. I also wanted to mention that there was a story that ran yesterday in the news that covers the sizable number of California legislators who are not expected to run for re-election next year. That includes both state and federal representatives. And the reasons include those who are running for an open seat elsewhere, which is a decent amount of those who are terming out, such as Senator Stephen Bradford, and those who are retiring. Several of our delegation and other offices that we work with are included in this report, including Adam Schiff, who's running for the Senate seat, Stephen Bradford, who is termed out, Laura Friedman, who's running for another seat, and then Grace Napolitano, who is retiring. Another big topic that will be a priority in the state next year is the budget. And things are not looking too great for the budget at this moment, with a significant deficit being projected by both the administration and the Legislative Analyst Office. Last week, the LAO, who looks at financial considerations of the state, updated its revenue projections, with revenue collections now expected to come in nearly $60 billion below Budget Act projections through 2024 and 2025. The governor will release his first budget of the year on January 10th, with budget discussions in the legislature beginning in March. So much more to come on the budget in the coming months, but you can expect the large deficit projection to shape some of the legislation, what kind of bills can go forward. Any bills with financial impact might have a tougher time again next year, as well as the climate bond that will go forth next year. And last month, I mentioned the Sites Reservoir look to be moving forward in the coming years. However, there's another major water supply milestone with statewide impacts that was announced this last week, and that was when DWR released its final environmental impact report on the Delta Conveyance Plan. The final EIR is the next step in the process toward approving the huge DSC project, and that's expected to result in approximately 500,000 acre-feet of water per year, in addition to what's currently received from Northern California water supplies. Now, the Metropolitan Water District, which would be a primary beneficiary of the project and which has been closely involved with multiple versions of the project, would be potentially a big funder of the project. Metropolitan said that the release of the final EIR will help the state address the impacts of climate change and seem generally supportive of it. They'll continue to evaluate the Delta Conveyance Project as part of its climate adaptation program in the coming years. Additional information, including a cost-benefit analysis, will help to guide the agency's possible investment in the project going forward. The state expects to complete all the permits for the project by 2026, with construction potentially beginning in 2030, although legal issues could delay those timelines. And then another big news on the state front, which we did kind of mention last week as part of the caucus, was that DWR announced the initial state water project allocation of 10% for the coming water, or I guess the current water year. This, again, this news was shared last week, but I just wanted to reiterate that for this committee. The first allocation is usually conservative, which seems to be the case here, as we did in the previous water year with a 100% allocation. That initial allocation is based on storage, snowpack, and other hydrological indicators. So despite a year with well above normal snow and rainfall levels, the start to this water year has been pretty dry, and so it's expected to continue being dry for the near future, and so that could impact the allocation going forward. The next one would be announced at the beginning of the new year, which would incorporate any big changes in hydrological conditions. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is that I am continuing to work with the board services and the general manager to solidify a date for our Sacramento visit. We hope to wrap up that process here pretty soon so that we can move forward in putting together our schedule of meetings and the updated legislative briefing book. So that concludes my state affairs report. I'd be happy to take any questions before I move over to the federal affairs.
Am I correct in assuming that the governor has supported the tunnel?
Yes, he's definitely been a supporter of of that project.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll go ahead and,
Thank
oh,
you.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, thank you, Matt. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Chairwoman Gray. So now I'll take the federal issues, and the December monthly report from VSA was also sent out to directors and is also available to download through the meeting chat. And VSA does just a great job of putting together a list of recent federal actions and news items that you can read in the report. But I did want to highlight a few items of interest from this month's report. So Congress will be going on their winter vacation at the end of this week with a return to the Capitol in early January. I believe I mentioned this last month, but Congress did approve a continuing resolution in November, which will keep the federal programs funded until early next year. This would prevent a government shutdown from happening for the time being. But what was kind of a new and unique move this time was that the continuing resolution will keep some of the federal programs operating through January 19th and others through February 2nd. This is a split strategy that wasn't very popular with a lot of the Congress, but it did make it through. And so that's now something that they'll have to deal with next year. So instead of just one deadline, they'll have two deadlines that they kind of have to deal with in terms of the budget. I also wanted to mention that the Bureau of Reclamation recently announced a new round of funding for some water and energy efficiency projects. This follows up a funding announcement for small scale efficiency projects. Our staff is considering applications for each of those grant opportunities for our ongoing grass replacement programs, as well as some other potential programs. And we'll be sure to kind of keep the general manager and the board updated on those activities. In other related news, the EPA announced $2 billion in new funding for projects in communities facing disproportionate pollution and environmental impacts associated with climate change. This new funding is a result of the Inflation Reduction Act, and it would in large part make investments in low-income, rural, and communities of color where pollution, economic equality, and health impacts are higher than the national average. So again, this is another opportunity where staff will be working to analyze if there's any programs or projects that we might be able to apply for. Moving over to the Colorado River, which I know Tammy will touch on as well. It's the primary topic of discussion at this week's CRUA conference, and it was announced by the Department of the Interior on December 1st that an agreement was reached with the Imperial Irrigation District to conserve 100,000 acre feet of water in Lake Mead in 2023. Funding for that is also being made available through the Inflation Reduction Act, and this first 100,000 acre feet of conservation will be followed by another 800,000 acre feet over the next couple of years. Again, these actions are being done to maintain higher storage levels at Lake Mead, while Colorado River water users and the federal government work out longer term operating agreements that will follow in 2026. Other similar conservation actions are being taken in Arizona as part of the overall strategy to reduce water use by 3 million acre feet. On the legislative front, it's believed that, I mentioned this in my initial item, it's believed that Congresswoman Grace Napolitano is getting ready to introduce legislation that would make water supply and conservation a primary component of the U.S. Army Corps' mission. This would manifest itself as prioritizing different measures and efforts aimed at ensuring increased and sustainable water supplies. So staff is working with VSA closely to track this issue, and we'll definitely be ready to bring it forward to the board for a possible position if and when it officially gets introduced, which will probably be early next year. And then finally, I wanted to mention that the EPA has announced proposed lead and copper rule improvements that fall under the Safe Drinking Water Act. The proposed rule would aim to replace lead service lines and would focus on communities with high exposures to lead in drinking water, As you probably recall, about 5-7 years ago, there was the Flint, Michigan crisis that occurred that was caused by dangerous levels of lead. So this is just another way that the government's working to target some of those areas of need. Staff is working with our water quality team to assess and look at this new rule, and we'll track this along with VSA as it moves into future phases, because right now is kind of a comment period for this new rule. And with that, that concludes all my prepared remarks for the federal report, but I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Matt. John, do you have any, Director Deere, do you have any questions?
Not at this time.
All right, thank you,
No.
Matt. The next item, please.
Yes, Madam Chair. The last of our information calendar items is item 6C. It's our monthly Metropolitan Water District Program update. And for this presentation, we have Tammy Hurley-High, our Water Policy and Resources Analyst.
Right, thank you, EJ. Good afternoon, Chair and Member Deere. Today, this information is an update on Metropolitan Water District programs that were discussed last month at their committee and board meeting. And it includes a few items of interest that are the long-range finance plan needs assessment, the cost estimate for the Pure Water project, the climate adaptation master plan for water, and then we'll conclude with a look at the water supply conditions. So feel free to ask any questions or provide any comments you may have to me at any time. So in addition to the written report that's included in the committee packet, to provide an overview on these areas, there are presentation slides that are included, which I will use to talk through a lot of the major points of the written report. And that begins on page 32 of the committee packet. And so first is the long-range finance plan needs assessment. This is a multi-year, multi-phase development process. Metropolitan staff presented information on this needs assessment last month. And there is a link that's included in the memo as well for more information and to access a copy of that document. And this is intended to serve as a financial management tool for long-range finance planning. And it is being presented in its first phase. There will be a second phase, and completion of the final long-range finance plan will be brought to the board for consideration during the next fiscal year, 24-25. And so between now and then, this will be reviewed and further developed through Metropolitan Climate Adaptation Master Plan for Water, as we refer to as CAMP. And just a little bit about the document, it outlines the estimated total capital investment requirements and the estimated future rate increases. It is designed and intended to provide an analysis of rate impacts, capital funding and financing methods, and including financial tools and strategies. So this information to prepare this document was utilized for Metropolitan 2020 Integrated Resources Plan, which projects future supply and demand scenarios across 4 different scenarios that are characterized by different outcomes of the imported water supply stability and water demands on Metropolitan. So this item was presented to the committee last month as an action item. However, the committee and the board members voted to concur with the report that we presented and will receive and file and refer to it as an initial report for planning processes. Next slide, please. Okay, so for the Pure Water Southern California project, this was an information item that was brought to the subcommittee last month. The Pure Water Southern California program, as you know, is planned to produce up to 150 million gallons per day of purified water from a new advanced water treatment facility located at the Los Angeles County Sanitation District Joint Water Pollution Control Plant in Carson. So Metropolitan presented a cost estimate for the Pure Water program. Their staff has been working on this during the past few months with a focus on getting a cost estimate for phase 1 of the treatment plant facility. The costs are roughly split between the treatment and conveyance aspects of the treatment facility. Phase 1 consists of delivering 115 million gallons per day and include 25 million gallons a day of direct potable reuse through the raw water augmentation. So here in this slide, it shows the estimated cost range on the Pure Water Program unit cost. And since the amount of contributions and grants can have a favorable impact on the unit cost, Metropolitan staff presented this in two forms as a low contribution estimate and a high contribution estimate. And they base that on an interest rate for financing. It's estimated to be 4.5% per year for 30 years. And these costs use an estimate of 118,000 feet a year of production based on an online time of 92%. So the cost estimates represent the work that needs to be done on the wastewater side to get all the way to the treated water. The phase 1 includes a backbone system, upgraded treatment, and pumping facilities. And for more information on the presentation materials, there is a link also included in the memo to show you, pretty much the whole presentation that was provided to the board. And there was much discussion on this program as well. And Metropolitan staff will bring back more information next month in January to continue review and discussion with the committee members. Next slide, please. So for the Climate Adaptation Master Plan for water, Metropolitan has been transitioning to a Climate Adaptation Master Plan for Water Task Force. And last month, the first joint task force was convened. And this includes both board members and member agency managers. This effort is in order for member agencies to participate in the discussion and to help develop a comprehensive adaptation planning process. So the goal of this task force will be to produce a regional climate adaptation plan that will include a framework for climate decision making and reporting. And there are 5 theme categories that they will use to help guide in this planning process, which include reliability, resilience, financial sustainability, affordability, and equity. So the Camp for Water builds on the Integrated Resources Plan assessment towards future planning that includes risks that are associated with climate change, along with drought and flooding, fire, and all of the other risks. This process will continue throughout the next few months. Metropolitan staff is planning to bring this to their board in April of next year for consideration to approve the climate decision-making framework. And throughout the coming year, work will continue with the deliverables that are part of the Camp for Water process through their task force charter. Next slide, please. Thank you. So lastly, this is a water supply update. Just have a couple of graphs here. On the left side is a graph showing the demands on Metropolitan this year. And as a result of above average in-region precipitation and available local supplies, delivery for Metropolitan during 2023 are projected to be the lowest deliveries since their records began in 1979. And then regarding Colorado River supplies on the right side, this shows the elevation for Lake Mead. And the graph shows what contributions Metropolitan would be required based on Reclamation's August 24-month study. So each year, as you know, in August, they have a 24-month study. It projects Lake Mead's elevation to be what the elevation would be in the next year. And if that August 24-month study projected Lake Mead's elevation to be at or below 1,045 feet on January 1st, then Metropolitan would be required to make drought contingency plan contributions the following year. But because the last August 24-month study projected Lake Mead's elevation to be above that level come time January 2024, the Metropolitan is not required to make the drought contingency plan contributions next year. Also, Metropolitan's dry year storage reserves at the end of calendar year is projected to be approximately 3.4 million acre feet. That's a record high in their storage balance. And that concludes the report. I think Matt covered most of the other items earlier regarding the state water project. They, announced their state water project allocation of 10%. As you know, this number is likely to increase depending on the wet weather conditions that we'll see. That concludes my report. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Tammy. Director Deere, do you have any questions?
No, thank you.
Thank you, Tammy, for your report. Next item, please.
Madam Chair, that concludes our information calendar and brings us to closed session. We do not have any closed session items today.
All right. The next item, director's comments. Director Deere, do you have any comments or future agenda items?
Not this time.
All right, thank you. General Manager, do you have any comments?
No, Madam Chair, I want to say thank you very much for your time today, as well as Director Deere. I know it was lightly attended, but I thought that the information that was provided was very important, so thank you.
And thank you to staff for the information today. So with that, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much. Thank you, Director Deere. Bye-bye.